All right, all branches of the U.S. military have set deadlines for service members to get the COVID vaccine. The Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps active duty service members have deadlines in November. And last week, the U.S. Army announced that active duty soldiers have until December the 15th to be fully vaccinated against COVID-19. Those who do not get the COVID shot could face a possible discharge from the military. For those seeking waivers to avoid immunization, there are essentially two options: medical or religious exemptions. But some have been reportedly told that religious exemptions, the effort to get that, would be futile. What are they? With me now to talk about this is Mike Berry, General Counsel for First Liberty Institute, which handles a lot of military legal issues. Mike, welcome back to the program.
It's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's start with this. Is it futile for members of the military to seek a religious exemption from the vaccine?
Absolutely not. Federal law, DoD regulations, the Constitution, they all protect the right of service members to request religious exemptions from this vaccine mandate. And any military official, any commanding officer, or anyone in the chain of command who tries to say otherwise is simply not telling the truth. And I suspect that many of them are, whether wittingly or unwittingly, misleading their troops into to misinformation.
Now, Mike, last week, the military said that the request for religious exemptions was going to be sent to the chaplains, if I understand correctly what I read about this, and that was going to be based upon denominational positions on the vaccine. But the reality is, the denominations haven't taken issues on the vaccine themselves. This is more of a individual religious liberty issue, is it not?
That's absolutely right. And again, any military commander or person in a position of authority who tries to do that, and by that I mean tries to direct a service member or coerce or compel them to speak to a particular chaplain of a denomination or to provide some sort of denominational position, is playing a very dangerous constitutional game. Because not only does the law not require that, in many instances, the law forbids government officials from forcing or compelling service members to essentially prove the legitimacy or validity of their religious beliefs. And one of the things that at First Liberty we've been advising service members of for weeks now is the only thing you have to establish as the service member is sincerity. Right? Your belief just has to be sincere. It doesn't even have to be reasonable in the eyes of somebody else, as long as it is sincere. And once it's sincere, the burden shifts to the government. They now have to carry the water, not you. And so that's why I say that these commanders and other officials are playing a very dangerous constitutional game.
So, Mike Berry, I know we've got a lot of members of the military that listen to our program. And I've actually been in communication with some who have emailed me about this concern. What do they need to do? How can they find out more about their rights in terms of exerting a religious exemption, and where might they find legal help?
Yeah, at First Liberty, we've been experiencing the same thing. Hundreds, thousands of people nationwide across all sectors of society, and hundreds who are in the military, whether they're active duty or reserve. They're being harassed, they're being intimidated, they're experiencing all sorts of hostility. So what we did is we created a COVID vaccine toolkit, is what we call it. It explains the law regarding vaccine mandates. There's an entire section devoted to service members and what service members can do. And I actually wrote myself, I'm the one that drafted it. So if there's any errors, I guess I have to take the blame. But there is an entire section devoted to the military with a template that service members can use to fill out that will essentially enable them to submit a religious exemption request. And what we're telling folks is we can't represent everybody who wants to submit a religious exemption request. But if your request is denied, send it to us at firstlibertyinstitute.org. We can review it and evaluate it and determine whether or not the request was denied properly or improperly. And if it was denied improperly, let's look at whether or not we should appeal that.
Mike, what has been your experience thus far with those making the religious liberty exemption claim?
Unfortunately, so far, Tony, it's just as you described at the beginning of our segment, which is they've been experiencing a lot of hostility and a lot of subtle and sometimes not so subtle coercion. And commanders have been telling them, you can submit this request, but it's an exercise in futility because I'm not going to grant it, or the military is not going to grant it. I mean, in one instance, an officer who's at the U.S. Naval Academy told me that every person at the Naval Academy and the faculty and staff who is not vaccinated was told they had to report 0800 in the morning. They were all rounded up in a room. They were given one last chance to get vaccinated. And if they weren't, then they were told, well, you can submit a medical exemption request or religious exemption request, but we're telling you, though, we are not going to favorably recommend that you get the exemption. And we believe the Navy will deny all of them. So, and Tony, what I'm telling people is, look, there will be some that get denied. We understand that. That's the way that the law works. Not every request for exemption is going to be granted, but the number can't be zero. And thus far, it's been zero. And that's a legal impossibility, and it defies logic.
Well, Mike Berry, we're going to encourage those that want to take this stand and exert this freedom to be in touch with you if they need the help, because you certainly will stand with them. Mike Berry, always great to talk with you. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.